Alright, so it isn't very often these days that I make a fan video with commentary, but I figured I would for this one, just because. So this is a Century S2-10 oscillating desk fan from probably about 1915, 1920, I would estimate. These fans, the S2 series, came in, I believe, three sizes. Correct me if I'm wrong. The S2-10, the S2-12, and the S2-16. Unless that was entirely on the S3. I'm not sure personally. But this fan is, I mean, it's a beautiful fan. It really is. I really like how small it is. As you can see, it's a 10-inch fan. And those are 12 inches, that Westinghouse Vane and that GE BMY. But this one's a 10-inch, so it's slightly smaller. Yeah. So it's a beautiful fan, but there's a big issue with the S2 series, all the S2 series. Century decided it would be a good idea to cast the motor housings. I'm not sure about the base. I've only ever seen this happen on the motor housings and the necks. They decided it would be a good idea to cast the motor housings and the necks entirely out of pot metal, which, if you don't know what pot metal is, it is basically where factories just gather up scraps of metal, they throw them all into a big pot and melt them down, and then they pour them into molds and cast parts. Well, pot metal over time doesn't really hold up. So it'll just crack apart and break and get all crappy and warp and stuff, and it's really not pretty. So I actually have two S2 fans. I have this S2-10 and I have an S2-12. The S2-12, I don't have it right here, but the entire gearbox on the back is busted off because I guess the metal probably warped enough that it just cracked away over time and fell off. So, yeah, needless to say, you look at these things wrong and they'll just fall apart. Now, sitting next to it, I have this little 9-inch R&M. And yeah, I know that's a 10 and that's a 9, but these fans are from about the same era, I would say. And this one is way better. Way, way, way better. Even though, yeah, it's still a stamped steel fan, which overall, I'm not a fan of stamped steel. I think actual cast iron is the best for, like, fan motor housings and stuff, but these are way easier to work on and they don't crack apart over time. So, yeah. But anyways, back to the subject of the video. Yeah, this is a S2-10, and here is a side profile. You can see that one of the struts is cracked apart because that's also pot metal. Then there's the base. Here's this very ghetto head wire that I did not bother replacing because this fan's probably just going to be a shelf queen its whole life. I'm not going to be running it very much because I want to preserve this fan as best I can. Even though, yeah, it's already starting to crack apart. You can kind of see right there. Yeah, I guess that's a little too pixelated. Let's try this. Or not. Okay. So, that's a crack right there. That's a crack right there. And then it's also cracking apart on the top a little bit. I guess the lighting in here isn't really the best. You can see I had to realign the stator on this fan because someone else had messed it up before I got it. And yeah, that happened in the process. The entire motor housing is kind of warped, like it's crunched down vertically. So the sides were kind of bulging out. Or, well, this side was way more bulging out than that side. That side, I actually had to put a brass shim in between the stator and the casting because I just couldn't get it aligned any other way. So that's obviously not nice, but that shows just how brittle this fan is. And there's also a crack starting right there. There's another one somewhere up here. I guess maybe you can't see it because the tag's on now. But then there's also a crack that's stemming all the way off of here going back into there. Here's the back. As you can see, it is kind of dirty. I didn't really clean this fan up. I got it as a parts fan, actually. Oh, what the heck? I don't know why my camera was doing that, but okay. That's a lot better. Yeah, I don't know what the story is on this fan, but I got it probably for like $5 at that from an auction lot at Fanfare this past year. And I got it with 1.5 other Century S2 fans. So there's the tag. This is one thing I hate about this phone, is that the focus just never works. It never works when I want it to, but yeah. So there's the fan, there's the back. As you can see, I had to patch up all this. And then I also patched up down there, just because it was cracking apart so much that it probably would have shorted out. Alright, so let's give this thing a test, I guess. Starting on high. It's a very nice fan, like I said. It has a nice sound to it. It sounds like a 12-inch, but it's a 10. So yeah, here's high. It moves a lot of air for a 10-inch, and it has that motor whine. I really like that. And here's low. This fan might supposed to be 3 speed, but I'm not entirely sure. Or actually, yeah, it is 3 speed. So that's medium. I didn't even notice that. I guess the contact must have been dirty, and then I sliding it across a couple times kind of cleaned it off. So going back to low, I haven't actually tested out the oscillator yet. I really hope that it's not a dud, but we shall see. That does not sound good, but it does oscillate. So I guess that's what matters. Then again, I didn't really put a ton of grease on those gears, so that could be it too. Going back to medium. And high. And there's off. Now, I will say another thing that is cool about these fans, and this goes for the S3 series as well, is the oscillator engagement mechanism. It's not like your average fan where you've got like your average, like, I would say 70s through modern day table fan oscillation mechanism, where you've got a gear going straight down that has the stem coming up, where you pull it to disengage and you push it to engage it, and there's just a set of spring-loaded balls that locks into place with a second gear that's along that gear, and then that gets driven off of the motor with a worm gear going horizontally. So instead of that mechanism, if I take this off, which, by the way, also you can see that, yeah, that's kind of falling apart. You can see that there's the gears in there. There is a worm gear right there behind that screw. that is coming off of the rotor. And then there's that gear right there. And then there's another worm gear right there that drives a gear that's even further back. You can't really see. That then goes down into there and onto an oscillator arm that then hooks into the neck. But that's fairly normal. But it isn't really normal to see this horizontally, at least in more modern times. So how this works is that this has a shaft coming down right here. And that's just a locking screw that goes into a little groove so that you can't pull this up and down. But there's a little tooth sticking out on the end of the shaft, and then the whole rod that goes through here that holds these two gears on, it has a slit down there, and that little the little notch on the end of there fits into that slit. And then when you turn this, you can see it moves the whole shaft. And what it does is it's like a clutch. Well, all oscillator engagement mechanisms have a clutch, but like it physically shifts the entire gear set horizontally. So that would be on, and you can see that these gears are pushed over. I can't turn that right now because that's locked in with those teeth. But then if I turn this back over here, you can see that I can move that. It's not going to move a ton, obviously, because it's still there, but you can tell that's a lot more loose than it was because those teeth aren't interfering with those worm gear teeth anymore. So yeah, I just thought that was kind of cool. I mean, I've worked on a million of these Century fans, but I still find that oscillator mechanism really cool for whatever reason. Anyways, I guess that's enough for one video. Hope you enjoyed, and see you in the next one.